Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and welcome back to the podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mr. Mark Mulroney, Vice Chair, Global Banking and Markets at Scotiabank, a TSX and New York Stock Exchange listed financial institution with a market cap of approximately $100 billion and $70 billion, respectively. Mr. Mulroney was appointed to his current role as Vice Chair, Global Banking and Markets in October of 2024. Prior to joining Scotiabank, Mr. Mulroney served in various roles at Goldman Sachs in New York City, RBC Capital Markets in Toronto and London, and National Bank Financial Markets in Toronto. Mr. Mulroney serves on a number of non-for-profit boards, including the BlackNorth Initiative, co-chairs the Boost Fundraising Advisory Board, and is chair of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government Advisory Board at St Francis Xavier University. Mr. Mulroney also earned an undergraduate degree from Duke University. Among other things, we discuss the art of listening, family lessons, and opportunities in capital markets. This podcast episode is powered by RBC Capital Markets. RBC Capital Markets provides financial solutions and strategic advisory services to help businesses thrive. With a track record of successful deal execution, RBC is a full-service investment dealer with a deep understanding and commitment to the industries it serves. Visit rbcapitalmarkets.com for more information. This episode is brought to you by Upgrade Labs. Upgrade Labs offers a comprehensive range of cutting-edge performance and recovery services that have been proven to optimize your health in minutes, not hours. Whether it's accelerating muscle mass and bone density or addressing injury and inflammation, start your experience by booking a free cell health analysis at upgradelabs.com/Calgary. Good afternoon, Mr. Mulroney, aka Mark. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure to be here. We were introduced by mutual friends, so anything for Marty.
Yes, and Marty, despite the outward appearance, does not have a royalty on the podcast yet. So just a quick disclaimer on that. We usually have to throw it out there. So for the listener, you are the Vice Chair of Global Banking and Markets at Scotiabank, which is fairly self-explanatory. But to give context, how large is the Scotiabank balance sheet and corporate finance deal flow? And what's your role involved at the company?
I work in the Global Banking and Markets business. We basically are the capital market structure within the bank. The bank is the third largest bank in Canada. We've been around for, more than 150 years, I believe. Very well known, obviously very well represented out your way as well. And I would just say from our aspect, looking to interact not just in the Canadian capital markets, but affect change in the U.S. capital markets, Mexico. We also have presences in Colombia, Chile, Peru, and obviously other parts of South America, and obviously offices in Asia and Europe. So my pleasure to be here with you today.
You're also willing to do this. Not many large bank executives will take the time. So it's skin in the game via podcasts. You actually take the time. So thank you.
No, honestly, it's great. And I was honored to be asked. And thanks for giving me a few minutes.
Also, your dad was the 18th Prime Minister of Canada. Your sister went to Harvard, is an MP. Your brother had a 20-year successful broadcasting career. Your other brother was E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year via Bond Bakery Brands. Your mom is the 11th Chancellor of St Francis Xavier University. So there's something in the water, it appears.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good way of putting it. And I got to give a plug. If we're talking about it, my older brother also has now a syndicated radio show, and he's doing extremely well with that, and he's loving it and very opinionated for those that want to listen in. So we got raised by fantastic parents, and they always wanted us to find our levels of happiness. And to be totally honest, that's all they really pushed on, and we all kind of found our own avenue. I'm not a lawyer like the rest of them, although Nick does have an MBA. I started in finance at a lowly level, and I've worked my way up.
You're fairly young when your dad was elected in the mid-'80s to early 90s, but do you remember when interesting people started to show up for dinner at the house?
Oh, very much so. Look, I think I was 4. I think the ages was 4 to 14, and an absolute blessing, right? People always say, oh, it must have been hard. You must have had a tough time. I have no memories of a hard time with them as parents. They always kept us around. They always introduced us to people. They always had us in front of world leaders. So you name it. If they were stopping through to see our father, or if we were traveling to see them, our parents included us. And it was pretty awesome. I mean, you can go through all the presidents at the time, from Reagan to Bush to Clinton. We had the pleasure and privilege of meeting them. And then you can think through any of the possible global world leaders who were involved. Gorbachev came by. A notable moment was that he had never seen a cast before, and I had one on my leg. So he got down and signed it. I can remember that vividly. All the good times, all the tougher times, we had people coming through the house, and my parents always actively had us involved, and we're very thankful for those opportunities. And we look back with extreme joy.
Does anyone stick out of all the people you met through the years and that time? The lessons you took from them, or the impression they made?
Ronald Reagan always sticks out because he was older than my dad, but they were technically peers. But he always liked to spend time with the children. George Bush did too, actually. Always found time. Like, Reagan would pull out a pack of Trident mints at the time out of his pocket for you every single time, knowing that I like the green ones. And Bush would wake up early and take you for a walk outside and show you what was going on. And it was always extremely. You always remember those things when adults took time for children, but also listened to them and spoke to them like adults, and got them involved in conversation and asked what they thought. It was pretty awesome.
Your dad instilled many lessons through the years, but to leave the listener with one or two, what stands out for you in terms of lessons that your dad passed on?
Yeah, my dad, what a guy. I guess if you think about it kind of for like maybe macro and go a little micro, was, he never stopped, right? He worked hard, he played hard, he laughed a lot, but he also always spent as much time as he could with his family. And I don't have a memory of him not being there. He was always present. So I would say that's where I would go there. So family first would be that first lesson. At the end of your life, no matter all the big things that happened to you, no matter all the places you went and things you affected change, where you affected change, I'd say you'll always just be judged on the happiness of your family. So stay close to them, always be with them. I'd say that's a big life lesson. And I'd say secondly, it's just as easy to be nice. Right? You don't have to agree with everyone. You don't have to get along with everyone. Yes, there's circles of battle, and there's moments when you have to step into the fray, but you can be positive, and you should be, and you can actually have a beer with the people you've fought against when necessary. So,
to go back in time, you were a career banker, but how did you get into banking, and why?
Wow. Yes. So I guess I like a lot of people, it was a suggestion from friends. Actually, my mom always said I was going to be a stockbroker, and my close friend said, you should meet this person. I got a summer job, and that summer job led me to trading off the international desk at a reputable U.S. firm. And I guess we went from there. It didn't seem like I was setting off on a career when I was a summer student, but I guess I love the pace. I love the energy. I love the finality of it too. When you were a trader, it started and it ended. You had to get things done. I mentioned that two of my siblings are lawyers. That longer gestation period of things, and how it takes 3 years and 4 years for all sorts of these things to go, that's not for me. I really like to get things done quickly. I like to solve problems quickly. So I guess that's kind of how it went. And then trading kind of led me to meet people who were smart, who could make decisions quickly. And I like that. I like the idea of dealing with those people. And I like the idea that you had to follow the news flow, and that with that news flow, there's so many different sources you had to follow, from, what was happening at the moment, what was happening down the road, economic data, all of those things that kind of led me to have larger, bigger macro and micro conversations with the portfolio manager at the time, I guess. And that led me to get to know traders, and that led me to get to know CFOs and CEOs and, board members and chairs. And I always like that. I like knowing people, and I like helping them solve problems.
Did you always want to be in banking and business growing up?
I mean, if you think about it, like, I feel like kids nowadays, and now I'm going to sound really old saying it that way, but I think like kids nowadays, everybody really, like my nephews and niece, they kind of know a little bit more about what they want to do. But for me, I think it was sort of rolled into it through a series of summer jobs. But the minute I stepped in, I knew that that's exactly where I wanted to be. So I don't know that it was something that was extremely premeditated, but trust me, it's never left. I really like working with the people.
If I'm correct, you started at Goldman Sachs full-time in July of 2001. The international banking market is massive in New York, perhaps a lot of opportunities there, but you came back to Canada. What brought you back to Canada?
Well, some of my family had started to move to Toronto. I knew the opportunity was there. I was covering clients up here, and I really liked the way banking was going in Toronto at the time. And I didn't view it as that different or a step down or a step change in any particular way. I actually viewed it as on par. I think the Canadian capital markets are on par. I think we have some of the best professionals. And I think the one thing we do is a little bit to what I said earlier. At night, all the competitors get out with their one client and they get along and they know each other. But then the next day they step back into the arena and they battle for that business. I think that's a little bit more Canadian and it aligns a little bit more with the person that I am.
In terms of Scotiabank nowadays in the banking world, what are the opportunities you're looking at in Canada? What are you focusing on in sectors and whatnot?
Ironically, I think all the sectors, there's an ebb and a flow, obviously. In Canada, we have energy and we have mining and we have real estate that are just a steady state, always kind of around. They ebb and they flow, of course, in terms of demand. I think the interesting part is technology obviously has changed over the last, call it 10 years, where it used to be a vertical and now it's just a horizontal that cuts through everything. So you have to have that technological understanding no matter the sector you're dealing in. But no, we are a full service investment bank with a massive capital markets in the US and growing globally. So to that end, it's about dealing in the sector at the moment that we can and also bringing the client all the products that they need to do during their day-to-day. It's not, you can't really just do one thing anymore, and Scotiabank does a really good job of basically servicing the entire client.
The value prop for some of the larger banks is that you get a vertical offering for the banking at a large company. Have you seen that to be an increasing value prop and important for companies throughout Canada? The fact that a big bank like Scotiabank can offer vertical banking and services all the way up from top to bottom?
100%. I think it actually, if you do lend and then you do all the different things along the way, I think it's really important. And I think people like to have one call to solve any problem. And I think Scotia really believes in client primacy. It's been a main focus of our CEO since he took over a few years ago. It's permeated all the way down through the rest of the firm. If you get to a branch or if you get to people in capital markets, it's the same thing. We can't be everything to everybody, but if the client and you agree to a partnership, that's where we really fire on all cylinders for them.
The Canadian banking market has been consolidated. There's less junior investment banks and out west, at least anyways, which is sometimes not a good thing for the larger banks who rely on the smaller guys to roll up and ultimately help you. Does that concern you at all that or lately there hasn't been as many smaller banks that will?
I think that's part, Trevor, I think that's part of the ebb and the flow that we're talking about. The majority of the people who will tell you that the biggest problem that there aren't smaller places are the people who used to work at smaller places. And a lot of them will roll up into the banks for particular times to incubate, and then they'll come back out. But I don't think the environment has changed dramatically where we won't see those types of, initiatives. Political climate has recently changed. So, I think you could very well see that, let's say in energy and in mining, I think you could see that kind of pushback. I expect a focus on investment in those spaces to continue, but mostly led by the strength of the balance sheets of the big Canadian banks that have been there to be helpful, most notably Scotia on the energy and the mining side.
What worries you for Scotiabank? What are the things that keep you up at night?
I think obviously we focus on any issue that's important to our client. I think Scotia is, as you said, a one-stop shop in so many places, and we are here because of at the behest of the shareholder, and we basically every single day think about like what could be the next risk. And we try to make sure that we keep that top of mind. So I can't really tell you one thing. I'm not going to tell you it's cybersecurity or, the rise and change in AI, but I am going to tell you that every single one of those things keeps every executive up. And we are always trying to get ahead of it to make sure that we can do the best, like I said, for the shareholder and for the client.
In terms of making a good investment banker, some people would suggest it's intelligence and good advice, but there's a lot of people out there who give good advice and are smart. So what to you makes a good investment banker? Is it the guy or girl that perhaps sleeps with their phone by their head or calls you back 10 times? What do you look for?
It's a very interestingly put question. I think God gave you 2 ears and a mouth for a reason, and I think you just have to start by listening. In majority of the time, people get in front of a client and they talk at the client. They think, I prepared this 81-page deck, so I'm going to tell them what to do. In majority, if you ask the questions, you don't even open the book, you use it for reference. I think the client will tell you what they would like to do. And that's a great place to start. Even if it is not anything you were prepared to hear, that's a great place to start. Listening to your clients has never hurt.
Speaking of good investment bankers, you've been able to establish a relationship with some large energy companies out west, like Tourmaline and Topaz, which is really hard to do. Some of the traditional investment banking relationships go back decades. How have you been able to break into that room coming from out east?
I've never considered myself anything other than Canadian, I'd say. So because of which, when I roll in there, I get the warmest of welcomes. I think that, you're mentioning two companies that are unbelievably built, but also built by people who want to deal with people. And so, if you listen and you bring them solutions and they help you, I think that's all it takes. That's relationship 101. And there's nobody better than the people running the two firms you just mentioned. It also helps if you can talk a little bit about baseball for one of them. But I would say, quite honestly, I don't think about, I'm coming from the east to the west or the west to the east. I think, we're one great nation. And I would say that, again, and maybe back to my dad. My dad did leave me with a very strong legacy and respect for the West, and he was always very welcomed out there. So because of which, I think that's kind of why I've been able to have some success, if any. I would only attribute that success to the clients themselves who were kind enough to kind of give us business.
There are investment banks in Calgary that can't get that kind of business, so they must be doing something right at Scotiabank. Although there are days when you don't get the deal from the issuer. On those days, what do you do? How do you step back and approach things when you don't get the call?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question that no one really asks. When you don't get the call, the only thing to do is hopefully fall back on relationship and ask the question, because on the postmortem, it's always good to find out what you could have done differently, what you didn't do well. In all honesty, you probably should have been asking these questions in lead up to that point, managing the expectation of the client, all the while managing yours. But I could tell you quite honestly that it's a bit of a catch-22. Sometimes you didn't get it because you've gotten too many before, or sometimes you don't get it because you didn't do the right things. But if you don't ask the question, if you don't have the relationship, and if you don't feel the trust of the management, then I think that you're in a difficult spot in the first place. If you only led, let's say, with one product, sometimes you can fall away, which is why it goes back to your question. How do I put myself in a position to bring the entire bank? Also, how do I open it up to multiple relationships? It's not just about a guy like me. It's about the exact team that basically allowed me to enter the door in the first place, and making sure they're speaking to the CEO, the CFO, the corp dev, the treasurer, everything you want to talk about, making sure there's many people so that the relationship continues on for, 100 plus years after the fact.
This podcast episode is sponsored by Conate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Conate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info@conatewater.com or check out conatewater.com for more details. This episode is brought to you by the Canadian Gas Association. The Canadian Gas Association represents Canada's natural gas delivery industry, whose members include distribution companies, transmission companies, equipment manufacturers, and other service providers. The Canadian Gas Association members deliver safe, reliable, and affordable natural gas to meet 38% of Canada's energy needs. Visit cga.ca to learn more about Canada's natural gas. If I'm correct, there was one banker at Goldman Sachs that Mr. Warren Buffett would communicate with, and that was Mr. Byron Trott, who obviously had some intangibles that he worked on. Do you look at examples like that to look towards what some of the best or the largest investors in the world value?
Yeah, I love reading, actually, on that specific topic. I love reading biographies, and I love hearing about stories about how others did it. And, if you can leave any type of talk with just one tidbit from somebody else. I mean, in my case, I always feel like a first-year analyst. I'm just as curious. I like a steep learning curve. I think you got to bring that same level of humility. It's not something you can fake. It's just who you are, and have confidence to listen, right? Like, you're going to pick up so much more if you do. So I think for me, that's kind of how I take it. And Byron Trott is one of the legends. He obviously had the pleasure and privilege of speaking to Warren Buffett every day, which I'm pretty sure we would all take. But there are many other leaders in Canada that I get to speak to on a regular basis. And like I said, I try to listen more than I talk because they know their businesses better than we do. Where we can add value is by bringing those banking services and the solutions that they require at the times that they require it.
On the days when your advice maybe goes against what the client wants, or you don't think the client's taking the right direction, how do you approach that subject when things aren't going in the way you suggest? Because you've been around for a while, you know a thing or two.
Again, I don't know that I know as much as they do, but I'd say I think you can never go wrong giving the right advice. If you go in just to win and you pitch the client and you tell them a valuation that's too high, or if you pitch them a product or a solution that isn't the right idea and you can't back it up with an opinion and with fact, that'll always come back to burn you. You might miss revenue in the short term, but in the long term, it'll do an extreme amount of harm to you and possibly to the firm you work at. So I would never recommend anything other than doing what you know is right, telling the client why you believe that, them having the right relationship with you to tell you why they're going with somebody else, and then you maintain the relationship as you go and be the right man or woman to be able to accept if you were wrong, and also know that the client is going to hear it from you if you were right. Just kidding. You're not going to tell them that, but
some of the boutique investment banks through the years have created alignment with their clients through bought deals and their own money in the deals to bleed if your client bleeds, so to speak. How do you align incentives with them at a larger bank?
I hope the people we are hiring are the types of people that truly believe in what they're doing and are really pitching business to do the right thing for the client and do the right thing for the institution they're working at. And that's just the kind of person I am. And I think that's the kind of people that Scotia brings to bear. I see people and I see the level of anger if they lose something or if something doesn't go the right way or they weren't aware. And everybody kind of has to take that on themselves. But the people with which I work, and that's who I can speak for because I see them on a day-to-day, they may not have that exact alignment, but it doesn't change a single thing about how seriously they take it.
What's your favorite part of investment banking? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
What gets me out of bed? Every single day is different. Every day. I don't set an alarm clock. 3 times a week I'll work out and I'll get right to work. Like I just love it. And I don't really think of it as a job. I think of it as a lifestyle because, my wife and I have 5 kids. Sometimes I'll be on a baseball diamond or sometimes I'll be at one of their sporting events. And because of that, like you're going to hear me on the phone and you're going to hear a noise in the background that is definitely not a trading desk. And I think if you think of it that way, which is I need to answer the phone now because it's important, but I'm not going to miss certain opportunities in case I should just be at my desk because I don't believe in FaceTime. I've been able to really live that or walk that walk. Scotia's allowed me to do that. And it's been a real benefit. And I think that's probably something that would be something I love about the industry.
So how do you balance having 5 kids and working a very demanding job? How do you do that?
I think 5 kids bring you balance, to be honest with you. This idea that you need to go off and meditate and do other things and, be by yourself. Like I'm not that guy. I love coming in and I love, the activity. It's a totally different level of activity from a trading desk to an investment bank to basically going into your house. But it's still pretty active and it's still pretty fun and you never know what it's going to bring. And no matter if it's deemed an up and a down, it's always a positive when you get that time with your family. And I'd say the same thing when it comes to work. We have a big team out here and you never know what it's going to bring. There are challenges, of course, but it makes the victories even that much sweeter.
From a Canadian energy perspective, the industry has its ups and downs, but how important is it to be there for the sector during the lows and the highs so that the clients can rely on you when things are good and bad?
I think you kind of stole a line that I would use. It's like you can't just show up when it's sunny. And I don't think anybody in out west or any of the other places where we do business from an energy standpoint would ever say that we are a fair weather friend. We take it really seriously. I would say that we have never suggested doing business any differently than we have. And I think we stand behind the businesses as well as the people who run the businesses and the people that are employed at those businesses better than anyone else. And I'm sure other people will like to differ. I'd have no problem arm wrestling over that one, but we take it really seriously and we take pride in our participation.
The sector has been undervalued the last handful of years, although there's been consolidation to help catalyze prices. And corporately, do you think further consolidation is required within the sector?
Yeah, I won't get into if I think it's consolidation or what it is. I do think, though, that we are at a great place. I think we have an amazing industry, and no matter how you look at it, and no matter how it's looked at globally, if you were going to buy a barrel of oil or get any gas from any particular place, there's no place better than Canada. And I think recent political events are probably going to change the landscape. I think that the environmental standards that we bring to everything that we do put us a tier ahead of everybody else. And I think that in Canada, we are top notch. And I basically think how we approach everything, and I mean anything, if it's clean tech, if it's how we're actually dealing on all of everything energy based. I mean, all of that, we just have such a good rapport. Canada does it so well when we link corporate to business to the government to private sector to all that stuff, that I think we tackle it so well that I think we are in the best place. And I'm bullish, right? I'm bullish on Canada. Some people are maybe perhaps not, but I know we will come to a point where we will have this thing fully on track. And I think all sectors are exciting, but I'm bullish on Canada today, tomorrow, next year. I feel good about it, and it's all because of the people.
The PDF titled Bettering Human Lives via Chris Wright, the recent energy secretary nominee in the States, has been a shift in energy policy down in the States where they recognize the value of traditional energy. Are you seeing that kind of awareness of the importance of it within Canada a bit more now? Is there a shift occurring, do you think?
Yeah, I guess if I say it differently, I never didn't see it. I just think that it wasn't as loudly said. So having pride in our natural resources, all the while understanding where our expertise lie, I think is a Canadian thing. And I think as you think about it and as we think about it, just like Scotiabank, we have pride in all the areas that we service and all the areas we look to find clients. And the West is no different.
The importance of supporting an industry that pays Canada a large portion of Canada's bills. Maybe a good way to phrase it.
Sure, perhaps, but it always has, and is due its due respect.
Politics? Have you ever considered politics? You could probably become PM if you wanted to.
To be honest, when you're Scotty Bowman's son, you talk a lot of hockey, so I can talk the talk when necessary. But my sister is already an amazing politician, and I see how hard she works day in and day out. And I respect her immensely for what she's doing. But politics has never or has not been something that I've looked at. And I'll be honest with you, I really love what I do. And there is an angle of politics at a larger organization in that you can help a lot of people with the action that you're creating, that you're looking to affect change with, and all of that. So to that end, I understand that because, the current prime minister is the son of a prime minister, people like to make that comment. But for me, it's I'm doing the right thing that I can right now. And I think I'm actually hopefully helping in all the ways that I can.
Doing podcasts like this.
Yeah, I'm glad to do this podcast. I was surprised you asked me. I'm here.
Well, I got lucky. So counting my lucky stars. Yeah. In terms of Scotiabank going forward, what do you see? We kind of touched on the opportunities for the banking side of things, but if you were to put your finger on where you spend the most time, what do you focus on for the business?
So I am 100%. I've done a bunch of different jobs since I've been at Scotia, but my job at its core is dealing with clients and trying to help them not have any problems at Scotia. But of course, sometimes little things arise, big things arise, or they want to do a big transaction. They want to make sure we bring the right people to bear. I get a lot of those phone calls, and I'm blessed to have that right from our CEO and from others in the executive who allowed me to do that. But it's all about the team, because one day a client is asking our opinion on cash management, which we take extremely seriously here, and the next day a client saying that he's had an issue, his father-in-law's had an issue with a mortgage, and he needs that fixed. I take all of those just as seriously because they're all for clients of the bank. And again, as I said, I operate at the behest of the shareholder. That's how it all goes. So, where are we going? We're going where the client's going. We can't predict these things. We just have to be prepared, and we have to be nimble. Right? A lot of people view banks as big and lumbering and frigates, but I would say that is not how we actually look at it internally. We are very lean in terms of team, but we have all the right people to do all the right jobs.
The Canadian banking system was looked to be a good example during the '08 financial crisis. But going forward, how do you see the Canadian banking sector play a role globally? Is it a good example for other people to look at in the future?
Yeah, I know what some people will say about the industry itself or how it goes, but the fact of the matter is we're 40 million people and we have some of the biggest, best companies that are banks that are here that are not just helping grow our future leaders, but also helping protect the future wealth of our individuals because there's a lot of asset managers here helping to basically nurture and foster the next technological part of growth in our country, like everything that's involved with AI and cybersecurity, right? Like that's a very important sleeve that banks absorb a lot of the cost that can hopefully help grow those things. And I would say people may not see it, but I do think the Canadian banks in a lot of cases lead the way and have done a very good job of putting us where we are today. And I go back, Stephen Harper was obviously in charge during that time, and he did a great job as Prime Minister guiding us through that extremely tough moment. And the Canadian banks have not looked back, and the Canadian banks continue to innovate to make sure that they are viewed as global class type banks.
To continue growing the Canadian economy, one of the best way to do that is to risk capital and entrepreneurship. How important do you think that part of the business is to support up and coming companies that you never know might be the next CNRL one day?
I think, we have a lot of those businesses that are tucked away in Scotia, and everybody kind of always sees, the $1 billion IPO or in some cases the $10 billion IPO. But we have a lot of ways that we are trying to help the entrepreneur and help the small business. And I think that there's a lot of governments that sometimes think they need to take that on, but I believe it belongs in private industry. And we are seeing that the Canadian banks have shouldered a lot of that and hopefully are continuing to grow those people despite, movement of population or despite changes in technology. I think we think that it is not just about the individual, but all of the people that have deposits with us, all of the shareholders. And so in those crops of people, everybody does things differently. Some people are in there for wealth creation. Some of them are in there for wealth preservation. As we look at it, you just have to know everybody's different, and you have to know we have to be able to help all of them differently as we continue to grow and innovate in their name.
You never know when the next Shopify might be coming down the line.
What a company. And honestly, between Kaz and Toby and Harley, what those guys have done and the way they've actually set up their business, it's extremely impressive. And they speak for Canada in a lot of cases, and they speak openly. And I think people really appreciate their dialogue.
But to make sure you don't miss companies like that, how do you help? Do you take a venture investing side of things, or does Scotiabank do any of that?
I mean, we have all sorts of areas that do that. I would not tell you that is the area that is the biggest. But if you think about it, in a pension fund, the venture piece is 4%. So I don't know what it would be within Scotia. I'm sorry, that's not my area. But I know that we take an active interest in every client. And that's not, if you're not a $1 billion company, that doesn't mean we don't pay attention to you. We take it very seriously, and we want to help grow those businesses as well. And that can be from a direct investment standpoint, or mostly just how you help nurture them through those times when we bring them all those pieces from, like I said, cash management to hedging to whatever they might need.
This podcast is brought to you by Rare Oilfield Services. Rare is a locally owned company that specializes in redeployment of surplus oil and gas production equipment through buying, selling, and refurbishing. Rare has a large shop that can restore anything including separators, tanks, line heaters, knockouts, and treaters. Whether it's reconditioned, new, or used equipment that you're in the market for, contact rareoil.com for more information. This podcast is brought to you by Energy United. Energy United is an organization with a mission to promote practical energy policy across Canada. Energy United is building a community of Canadians that are passionate about Canada's natural gas and oil industry and are willing to take action. Energy United is driving change on issues that matter, all the way from the carbon tax to the emissions cap. Join Energy United to make a difference at energyunited.ca. The definition of risk, traditional risk at banks, used to be hard assets, but that is changing with digital assets in the form of, say, a podcast or a website with an audience that generates actual revenue. Have you had to change the way you look at risk from a lending standpoint at the bank or doing deals? How do you think about that?
Look, I can't speak for our risk officers who are some of the best in the world. And I will just tell you that in my role, I get to hear some of the things that have to be looked at, and we take it extremely seriously. And our risk partner is just as important as our deal partner on that, and they do an amazing job at what they do. But it's ever evolving. So it's back to the other point. How are we looking at it? Because now there's alternative investment, or how are we looking at it with private equity, and how are we looking at these things? To be honest, it's made it more complicated, and then you kind of layer on a little bit more about regulation, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop doing it. That doesn't mean we're going to stop doing it well. We take it even more seriously. And because of that, I think, you have to put yourself in a place to, again, think through who the end customer is, who the shareholder is. And once you do that, and once you think about it that way, you just realize that, yes, there might be a lot more work, and there might be a lot more regulation. There might be a lot more, some people call red tape, but I think it's just part of the business. And as we kind of work through it, I think that that's where, CEOs like ours show their leadership. And that's why I think we're being extremely successful and being rewarded in the public markets at this time.
As an investment banker or the leader of the investment banking at Scotiabank, I suppose the best thing you could do for a client is give good advice. But from your perspective, how do you support businesses throughout Canada the best? What's the best thing Scotiabank can do?
Listen. I mean, it's listening. And our CEO does it really well. He loves to be out in front of clients, and I've been with him a bunch. He's an absolute machine in that front. But it's the idea that it's always been done this way is the most dangerous part of this game. And so how do you do it? You go see them. You don't stand behind a screen all the time. You go see them and you ask them questions. And you ask them all sorts of different ways to say, like, what can we be doing better? What are others doing better? What are you seeing that are upcoming challenges? A lot of what you're asking me, Trevor, you ask those to your clients, you're going to come back with a laundry list of things, but you might even just come back with one thing. And you treat that one thing as it is the most important thing, because it is. And with that, you can build on a relationship where you successfully build a strong foundation, i.e. that relationship. And you can basically come back the well over and over again because you have proven yourself as someone who is a viable counterparty who can be respected and trusted.
What's the best way to make those introductions and get the relationship started? Is it the first meeting, just some solid advice? How have you thought about that through the years?
I had this one meeting where I had just taken over, and I was dealing with this massive account in Boston when I was a trader. And I mean, I couldn't get the guy on the phone. I would pick up, he would hang up. And I basically flew to Boston to see him, and I waited in his lobby from 8 a.m. till 4:20. He came out. And I walked up to him and I said, "Hi, I'm, Mark Mulroney, and it's a pleasure to meet you." And he goes, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "I'm the guy on the other end of the phone that you keep hanging up on." And he laughed, and he basically said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Well, come on, it's a lot harder to hang up on somebody when you've met them." And he laughed. We had a beer. I went home, and he became a good client. I think to answer your question, it's do whatever you think it takes within reason. Like, don't be dumb about it. Try to build commonality, of course, but understand the client and understand how they're remunerated, what motivates them, who they are as people, and recognize that it's a people business, and try to do whatever you can for them to help them grow their business. Right? Like, people aren't coming in and saying, like, help me do the opposite. They want you to help them with growth and grow their business and be a good partner and be a good listener and be a sounding board when necessary. So I think that's kind of where I would start.
Sometimes it's a balance between Bud Fox and going overboard, perhaps.
Yeah, I would say it's nowhere near Bud Fox, and I would say that is definitely overboard.
On the days, sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't do. Do you ever have to tell clients that maybe you should pass on this one?
Of course. And that's what I was saying to you earlier. I think the best advice is always the right advice. So if you feel it and you can prove it and you can show them why this doesn't make sense or why you don't think it makes sense, and that's firmly what you believe in your core, tell your client that. Don't just do the deal for the short-term gain. It will only come back to bite you.
Through the years, you've met a lot of leaders in the business world, entrepreneurs, and are there any that stick out to you that you've really learned a lot from in the business world specifically?
In the business world specifically, yeah, and it's never, what's interesting about it is it's never age, right? You never think about, oh, it's because this person was older or whatever, because I was younger and now I'm gravitating. I've now spent a lot of time in the private equity world, and a lot of these gentlemen and ladies who have risen to the top really impressed me because of how much they have to handle and shoulder, and a lot of them have become really big family people. I would obviously say, I've spent time out in Calgary. You mentioned a few people that are obviously highly respected. And then I've also, because I ran the financial institutions group, I had the pleasure and privilege of getting to know people who run insurance companies and banks. But I couldn't, really, I wouldn't put anybody ahead of anyone. I would just say that altogether, I've been blessed to be able to meet really great people. And I mean really great people. And I try to take away one thing from all of them. It's a pretty blessed life that's happened for me.
Through your experiences, what has been the best way to build your business and financial acumen? Is it just showing up to work every day? Do you read a lot? Is it meeting successful people? What to you has been the best way?
I guess 100%. So firstly, yes, I read a lot. I try to come in early. I try to stay late. I'd say do what you say you're going to do. Follow up. Be where you're supposed to be. Be consistent. Your attire, your behavior, never be erratic. I think that's kind of where I would start, because that's kind of the most important thing. And those are the things that have never led me astray. And I would say the only other point I would say is never to assume like, that client doesn't want to do that. Oh, no, he would never want, oh, she hates that. Picking up the phone and asking the question. You can even say, hey, I didn't want to assume. I'd never want to assume, but I don't think you'd like to do that. And you'll get an answer. But a lot of that is also relationship building. And a lot of times people don't have the actual relationship to call that person and ask them. So they say it, and then something pops up. They miss an opportunity when they should have said, I'm sorry, I really don't know that person well enough, to their boss. Can we go meet them together? Because I'd really like to build that relationship. And let's ask them that question. It's a confidence piece. It's hard, but you'll be so much more respected if you do that.
Has the value of reflection and admitting when you're wrong come up often? And how do you deal with those situations? Have you found that to be valuable?
Always, but I mean, always wrong. Like we're just growing up. None of us are right. There's so many times where we are wrong, and just admitting it. Goldman was a great place where it taught you that the minute you make a mistake, throw your hand up. And if you don't throw your hand up, you'll be in trouble. And I think that's really how I've tried to lead it. It's like being in a meeting where a bunch of people are talking about a business and throwing acronyms out and you have no idea what they're saying. The confident piece is to say, I'm sorry, I do not know what those things mean. But then after you ask, you write it down, you tend to know it. It's actually something you can learn from, which helps you develop. So to that end, just put your hand up, ask questions, admit you're wrong. It's the best part actually of finance.
Sometimes along the lines of hubris and being overconfident is projections that create a false sense of security. Through your years, have you had to navigate around that false confidence? And how do you deal with that aspect of business?
I think you sometimes run into people along the way, but I would say in majority, I've run into great people, and they've all led me in different directions, and I've had to kind of set my own course. I've had really good people around me who have been unbelievable mentors to that end. But I would say it hasn't just been one person. It's been a lot. And in majority, and I mean heavy majority, they've been great people, just wonderful people along the way who understood that I would be there and I wanted to learn because I kept asking, and they were just always there to deliver and to be helpful. And it changed my life.
And from a leadership perspective, now that you are a leader, people need to like working for you. But on the other hand, your colleagues and whatnot are not always your friends, and you're not their parent either. So how do you balance that? People enjoying working for you, but also the professional nature of the relationship?
That's a very interesting question. Look, I'd say back to my first point, it costs nothing to be nice. And so, yes, I understand that the people you work with can't always choose each other, and you can't always choose them. But I can tell you right now, I'm extremely lucky to work with the group I work with. There are a lot of people who have told me how great the people at Scotia are, and that's really part of it. The fact that we have culture carriers around us and great people really make the day that much better. And so, sure, you encountered people, but all those people do is teach you how much better the good people are. You can wallow or dwell on, how bad this guy is, and I can't deal with him. I mean, move on. I mean, if you can't change it, just move on, go find another job if you don't like it, but don't dwell on it, because that's not going to make it any better for you. That's not going to make it any better for your home life, and just try to affect change that way.
Do people need to like you? Do you need to be friends with your coworkers?
I think it's nice if there's a friend side to it, but I really just think it's about respect. And so if people see you're a hard worker, then they're going to mimic that you're a hard worker, that they're a hard worker, and they're going to show you hard work, and they're going to show you respect. And I think that's kind of what I've seen as I've grown up following other leaders along the way. And I would say I hope that I'm walking the walk and hopefully where possible, setting an example, but still learning from the leadership ahead of me and the people who came before me who showed me a really proper way to do it. I hope.
Maybe to leave the listener, you're not that old yet, but if you were to give advice to a 25-year-old, what would you tell them?
I think I'd say work harder than anybody else. I'd say, but to do that, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, because at the end of the day, you're putting those two together. It's not because you have to, it's because you want to. And I think sometimes people get confused on that. The passion, everybody sees a passionate person they work with. And so to that end, do that, right? And I've said it before, like, be kind to everybody. And I mean everybody. Business karma has a funny way of coming around. And so it doesn't hurt to be respectful and ask people how they're doing and talk to them. I think it's a really nice thing. And I learned that picking it up from my parents along the way. And I think it's just nice to look people in the eye and ask them how they're doing. And I think those things kind of come back for you. And I guess one thing is, if you are going to get married, and that's the most important decision of your life, so make the right choice. And I think that ever since I got married, it's only been upward. It was already on a terrific trajectory, and it's only gotten better. And so, I have the benefit of living in a town with all my siblings who are here and all these grandkids and all this, and family is still the most important.
This is a tangent, but when someone isn't on the right path in life and perhaps you're looking to find a passion, how do you suggest doing that in a sometimes corporate setting? It's very hard to just quit or change jobs. What would your advice be to someone who maybe isn't happy with their current job to find that passion?
I think sometimes we think it is confusing, and you're right. It's not easy all the time to find a new gig. I get that. But you can tell that it isn't your passion. You got to try to figure out what that passion might be. And sometimes it's as simple as writing down on a piece of paper, once on like a ledger, things I like, things I don't like, things I'm good at, things I'm not good at. And with that, being able to figure it out. And at your fingertips, you have so much information. And I'm not talking about TikTok or Instagram where you got 30 seconds of information. You can go to YouTube or Khan Academy or all sorts of places where you can learn new things along the lines of what you're suggesting here. And perhaps with that, you can find that next area where you can be who you actually would prefer to be and do what you'd prefer to do, and make that change. Because you're right, it's not easy. And I'm not suggesting that anybody can just step up and do that. But I would also say that if you don't look at it and if you don't try to affect that change, it'll never happen.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but.
No, it's a real pleasure. I really thank you for reaching out. I thank all your listeners for thinking that this might be interesting to them. And if anything, I wish you tremendous luck. And at some point, I would like to shake your hand.
It'd be great to meet in Calgary one day or in Toronto.
That would be great. That would be wonderful.
All right. Well, we can end the conversation there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, listeners out there. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Hopefully the episode provided some insights. If you enjoyed the show, check out trose.ca where more episodes are yet to come. You can also subscribe to the podcast where your token of support is much appreciated. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.